Good afternoon, everyone. We apologize so much for the hectic afternoon so far with technology that we're having, but we do appreciate you all joining us for the Virtual Professional Development webinar today. As Kayla said, if you have anybody from your state or any colleagues that are interested in this, please send them that new link for them to join in. And in addition, we will archive this and it'll be available on the NA4HA website as well. But again, we apologize, but we are excited to have Kayla and Hannah with us today to present our webinar, Affirming LGBTQ Identities at 4-H Camp. Through their abstract, they shared that the objectives for today are threefold. One, to build awareness of best practices to support LGBTQ campers and staff. Two, to recognize appropriate language to be used in camp documents. And three, to foster an inclusive environment for all through effective camp staff training. So Kayla and Hannah, thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to hearing from you. And with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeffrey, and thanks to our background assistants with NAE4HA who are able to get the appropriate link out to all of you. Let's get started by introducing ourselves. My name is Kayla Oberstadt. I use the pronouns she, her, and hers. I'm a 4-H program manager here at Ohio State 4-H, and I work with older youth leadership programs as well as Ohio military kids.
And I'm Hannah Epley. I use pronouns she, her, hers also, and I'm the state specialist in Ohio for 4-H camping and older youth.
And just to get started, to let you know why we are focused on this topic and why we've gotten to this point is simply because our task force with camping and environmental education has looked at how can we bring in a little bit more inclusivity and talk about those tough questions that have come up in our camping environments, especially when it comes to overnight housing, having gender-specific restrooms and overnight programming, as well as using inclusive language. In addition, the dynamic duo who's presenting to you today, myself on the left, Hannah in the middle, and the two of us recently at camp just a week ago, have been part of what's called Ohio 4-H Leadership Camp over the past 5 years together. And this is a camp where we have been really positively engaging our campers and staff in inclusive behaviors, actions, even using our pronouns on our name tags and promoting that to our campers as well. So with that, that has started us with the Ohio 4-H LGBTQ plus Summit, which took place in April. Some of you might have seen that promoted over the past year, and I'd like to share with you that that invited educators and 4-H staff from 15 different states who attended. We had an outcome of about 80 professionals and just over 30 young people attend that summit who learned things similar to what we're talking about today. But again, today's focus is specifically for camping environments.
And Kayla and I got nominated, I guess, to present this topic because we have had some experience, particularly in the last couple years, of really personal experiences for how we needed to handle to accommodate these potential situations and that sort of thing. And so we're just sharing some of our lessons learned. It's not going to be the best necessarily solution for everybody, but what we're hoping to do is just kind of create some dialogue, some talking points to help you as we journey through this together. So objectives for our webinar today are to build awareness of best practices to support LGBTQ plus campers and staff, to recognize appropriate language in camp documents, and then to create an inclusive environment for all through camp staff training. So those are our three main things that we hope to cover today. Also, if you haven't already and you do have questions, please feel free to type them in the chat box. As you think of those, we will do our best to answer those, and we will, of course, try to address any questions at the end also. So as you think of them, go ahead and type them in the chat box, and we'll make sure to get to those too.
Excellent. So as we get started, for some of you, we want to start from the ground up. And when it comes to the term LGBTQ+, I'll do a quick definition of that. L, lesbian, G, gay, B, bisexual, T, trans or transgender, Q, queer or questioning, and the plus is used for any other self-affirming identities. We know that there are many names used for somebody of certain gender identities or sexual orientations. And in the umbrella of LGBTQ+, it allows us to include everybody without having an alphabet that's 20 letters long of the other options that are there, because we do want to affirm everyone in their expression as they choose. So with that, common definitions that we just want to make sure everyone's on the same page with is, the first is biological sex. And the definition there is the biological body that somebody is physically represented as through their hormones, chromosomes, and body parts. So examples here are male, female, and intersex. Two of them are more common than the other, but we recognize all three as biological sex options for humans. Gender is determined by a personal emotion, feeling, someone's presentation, expression, behavior, social expectations, and so on. So if someone were to ask you what your gender is, you may respond a man or a woman or a boy or a girl or male or female, but there are other options such as agender or gender fluid or gender binary. And these are some that will help describe later on in our presentation. But again, we cannot take the time in a 1-hour session to get through all of them. When it comes to gender, two terms that you might become more aware of are transgender or cisgender. And the reason the asterisk is listed behind trans is trans with the asterisk might be referred to as an umbrella term, more than just a gender, but it's somebody's identity. They might use being a trans man or a trans woman, trans male, trans female, but that is up to that individual. So what transgender means is that somebody has changed their gender. Cisgender is using the gender that is assigned to their biological sex at birth. So for example, somebody who is born and recognized as a female who identifies as a woman or a girl would be cisgender. Somebody who is born and identified as a female at birth, but chooses that their gender identity is actually that of a man or a boy, that would be a transgender individual. Notice that it is not a describing word with an ED at the end. Somebody is not transgendered. Someone is a transgender person or a cisgender person. I know that some of these terms might be new for those on the call, and I want to recognize that if you have additional questions, we have resources to help share those. But again, this is just kind of a blanket summary. Looking at gender identity is simply what a person feels most closely aligned with. Again, man, woman, gender queer, gender binary, and such. And then gender expression is the way a person chooses to express their gender. So think about yourself and how you choose to dress, do your hair, and appear to people who you are around. Are you expressing yourself in more of a masculine or feminine attire, or somebody might be more androgynous, which is simply kind of in the middle, where you might not recognize what their gender is unless they chose to tell you. So with that, I want to ask you for a chance to write in the chat box if you are to be assigning campers and camp staff at an overnight camp to cabins. How do you choose what cabin they are in? Is it based on biological sex, gender, gender identity, or gender expression? So I'll just give a few seconds if anyone would like to type in the chat box how they recognize those cabin assignments. Go ahead and enter those in now. So right now we do have a few responses. Biological sex and gender identity are two of them that have been offered. I like that one response says, currently we use biological sex to assign cabins. And I'd like to say that that is probably how most of our counties and state programs have done in the past, and perhaps still currently. And I'd like to share how in Ohio we have adopted a practice of recognizing someone's gender or gender identity. And this is something that across 4-H guidelines of being inclusionary to all, we are making waves in moving forward to recognizing folks' gender identity for their cabin assignments. So for example, I'd like to share an excerpt from a 4-H guidance for inclusion of individuals document that Ohio adopted, which came from a Western Region 4-H Program Leaders Work Group. And in the overnight accommodations, this document reads that 4-H may provide separate housing on the basis of sex, which you are right, sexual, biological sex here. But in such cases, 4-H shall allow transgender and intersex individuals to access housing consistent with their gender identity. So given that guidance from this document that has been reviewed at the national level and from local Ohio approval as well, we are using gender identity to recognize where campers and camp staff are housed. So thank you to those who shared your responses in the chat box. Next, we're going to go through some of these definitions a little bit more on what the sliding scale looks like. Gender identity, across the top, you see the brain. It's how somebody in their own head thinks of themselves. So what composes you, how you interpret what that means. Being more of a man, a woman, someone in the middle might determine themselves as genderqueer. Gender expression then, as I mentioned, how somebody appears or demonstrates their gender to others, might be more feminine, more masculine, or in the middle, androgynous. And this doesn't mean that someone is always on one extreme or the other, but they might be more gender fluid, or depending on the environment or climate they're in, might choose to express themselves one way or another. And then biological sex, female or male or intersex. That is objectively measurable by science, hormones, and chromosomes, and describes body parts there which determine somebody's biological sex. And then sexual orientation is what someone's attraction is to. So physically, spiritually, emotionally attracted to based on their sex and gender in relation to your own. So if we were to use this in a camp staff training setting, it's something that Hannah and I have done with our own teammates. And by doing this, it gives a really good summary of what it looks like for someone to introduce themselves and describing themselves on each one of these levels if they felt comfortable doing so.
Right. And so, for example, something that we've done, just because I think, so Kayla talked about the scale. So I'll just give you an example of, as I've done this before in the past with training camp staff. Here's how I would lead it if my own introduction. So for gender identity, I do identify as a woman. So I'd be on the left-hand side of that scale. Regarding gender expression, so I am the type of person I typically prefer to wear my hair in a ponytail. I don't wear a lot of makeup, if any. I like wearing t-shirts. I like playing sports. I like, watching sports on television. So I have some masculine type of things too, even though I will wear skirts or dresses if I have to, but that's not my preferred thing. And so on that scale, I'd probably be still leaning on the feminine side, but more toward the middle of it, just because I do enjoy some masculine things too. That side of thing. And also like television shows that I watch, like all those types of things can, relate to how you express your gender. For biological sex, I would say I was born a female. And regarding sexual orientation, we're at camp, so it doesn't matter what you're attracted to. And my response is always, but Hannah, you're married, you have 2 children. And I say, it doesn't matter. We love everybody at camp, and we don't love anybody at camp because it's camp. And so it doesn't matter who you're attracted to because we don't have relationships here. And so that's just kind of a way to acknowledge that there is that sliding scale, but also to not encourage any relationship discussions too. So that's just what we do with that.
And given that, if we have somebody who recognizes themselves, let's say on 4-H online through our registration system as a male, and yet they register for camp, and they use gender identity and they express themselves as a female or a girl, what do we do? So by looking at this genderbread person, we know that their biological sex is male because they indicated that to us previously, but now they're signing up for camp and their gender identity is that of a woman or a girl or female. And based on that document that I alluded to, is that we house our young people and our staff based on their gender identity. So even though it was previously mentioned of their biological sex being different than their gender identity, we will accommodate their housing choice based on gender identity. So what we want to do is recognize, how do we ensure that potential campers, counselors, and staff feel safe at camp and that they're not put into a box, because we see that these lines are fluid and can change for somebody over time. So our next slides will outline this by how we use inclusive language in our camp documents. But first, before we get that, just for a slight piece of humor, is it's camp. Everyone gets to be themselves at camp. So even if you want to dress up and add a wig or the lunch lady apron here, or you arrive to camp as Blake Shelton and Gwen Stefani, and somebody is questioning a gender identity or a change in somebody's appearance, we recognize people for who they are, where they are. Now, for example, these photos are taken at a camp where we as staff dress up for our themes, but we know that kids get to be kids at camp. And if they are being recognized in a new gender identity, we want them to feel welcome. So of course, we're using photos of ourselves, not of our campers, to relay this message.
So the things to consider about this is you want to set the stage before you even get to camp, to kind of think through things to make sure that you are prepared, but then also to kind of set the culture, the climate of what that looks like when you're coming to camp. So this is something that Kayla and I have first hands-on experience with this. And so we have a state 4-H leadership camp that obviously is statewide. And so we knew last year that we had an individual that identified as a transgender. And so we wanted to make sure that we were meeting that individual's needs. And so we really started doing a lot of research and things. And one of the things that was recommended was to make sure that you communicate with campers, counselors, and staff to include non-discriminatory information. And so this is an excerpt from the leadership pre-camp letter that we send to the individuals that attend. And the things that are in red and underlined are things that I wanted to point out. So it's an inclusive and affirming camp experience, that you will live in a cabin group of the same gender, and you will participate in leadership camp programs and activities with a mixed gender program group. And then we also talk about, that our programs are available to clientele on a non-discriminatory basis without regard to age, ancestry, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it also includes gender identity or expression, sex, sexual orientation in there, among other things. And so by including that, you're setting that stage already of saying, here's what our environment is like, what our camp culture is like, before you even get there, without pointing out like, oh, by the way, we're going to have, this person here that's, Kayla now, and a year ago went by Kyle. So that's just kind of what we do ahead of time. So then some other things to make sure that you're considering as you're doing this is for determining cabin assignments of a participant. For example, we have first name and last name on here, and then gender. This is something that they submit on their own, and they type in a box. We do not have check the box, male, female, whatever. It is literally a blank that we have, because if you get a Chris Clover, an Alex Trebek, a Jesse Ventura, Taylor Swift, Blake Shelton, or Sean Connery, you don't necessarily know what their gender is based off of their name. And even if it would be a name, that's probably more likely, you still don't know that for sure. But by having that included in there, they're identifying themselves based on the cabin that they would like to live in. And so that's the purpose of doing that.
And when we have that blank being an open-ended response, just like somebody's eye color or hair color or t-shirt size, if we end up with someone responding something other than male or female, boy or girl, and it might be gender queer or gender fluid or gender non-conforming, Or maybe it's specifically, they say they are trans male to female or trans female to male. Once we have that indication, that is when we follow up and respond in the appropriate steps, which we will go through. But given that it's an open-ended blank, it doesn't cause any additional distress to somebody who already might conform to a male or female role. There's no question about it. They simply answer it as for who they are. And this really opens it up for those who aren't feeling like they fit in a box, which camp typically has been. Are you sleeping on the male side of the river or the female side of the river? We just need to know how you're identifying so that we can put you in an appropriate overnight location.
And so a thing to note with that is that if there is something on there that is not male or female, those things that Kayla mentioned, that's an opportunity to have a conversation with that person so that you can have further information of like, hey, I see you indicated this, insert conversation of where you're comfortable staying, you know, and here are your options, and those sorts of things. So this next slide that we have up here is then on the health form that we have. And so obviously you have the demographic information, name, address, that sort of thing. But it does have a male and female on here, and that's because it's to determine the biological sex of a participant. For the main factor that the medications that the health professional would need to give them would need to know what they are biologically assigned and that sort of thing, so that they can make sure that they know how to best care for the individual. And so that's why that is the way that that is for what we use in the Ohio 4-H program, at least.
And as we go back to some of our other camp documents, I'm sure many of you send out a pre-camp letter that includes what's appropriate at camp and what's not. And some of that comes to swimwear. And instead of indicating if swimwear is specific to a certain gender or biological sex of person, we simply put out what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. There's no reference to this being male swim attire or female swim attire. Same with our leadership camp dress code. You know, it's for everybody about tank tops, cutoffs, or crop tops. It's not just girls not wearing short cut shirts or skirts. It is simply across the board. Again, no reference to male or female. No guys wearing anything that would have been stereotypically alluded to men. It's just open-ended. This is our dress code for everybody. So by looking at this example, it was something that we had to update in the past couple of years when we started doing this. Read through it and see how can we make this dress code more inclusive. So when we asked them to bring a slightly more dressy outfit for the final dinner, we had it as females specifically, sundress, skirt, and blouse or nice pants and a shirt, closed-toed shoes. Males, button-up shirt and khakis and nicer shoes. So perhaps in your own mind right now as I read that, you can think about how we can make that more inclusive. And how we did that was we just eliminated the male and female indication, and it still reads as the exact same options, but it allows it for anybody to read it for themselves. So the next thing we do is when it comes to staff training topics, which is one of our objectives we want to cover with you as 4-H professionals, you train your camp counselors and staff members and adults to be inclusive, to walk the talk. And this comes in well before camp even starts, is teaching them the terminology and language. So just as Hannah and I did when we introduced ourselves, we used our pronouns and we discussed why pronouns are important. Up until this point in the program, I have not explained why those are important, but I will take the moment to do so now. And it's important because we recognize that people might not fit into a gender identity that is specifically he, him, hers, or sorry, he, him, his, or she, her, hers. Perhaps somebody's gender identity is that of being gender fluid, so they use something of they, them, theirs, or they, them, zers. And there's a multitude of other pronouns that somebody might use in place of their name. So masculine pronouns, he, him, his, feminine, she, her, hers, and others who affiliate with perhaps being gender non-binary or gender fluid might use they, them, theirs, or any of these others that we've mentioned. By doing this, it allows them to express who they are without feeling awkward about it. So as a leader of a camp, going in front of the group and expressing my name and pronouns first, it has now opened up others to recognize that I'm a safe person for them. And that definitely happened this summer at leadership camp. We had all of our staff have their pronouns on their name tags. And when Hannah introduced camp to them, she pointed out that their name tags have space as campers to put in their pronouns, and many of them did. And of course, we had plenty of the guys who recognized themselves as he, him, his, young ladies who did she, her, hers. But of a camp of about 70 campers, there were at least 4 that I counted who wrote down pronouns of they, them, and theirs. And while they didn't have to share with me or Hannah specifically why they identify as such, it became a learning opportunity for their peers and their camp counselors to learn who this person was and why they identify that way. So other topics that you can share with your staff is that Genderbread Person, something you can find online or ask us for the handout. It is not something we created, but we do share and give credit to the partner and agency who created it. And then a matching activity where we've used cards to match things like biological sex and gender identity to a definition. And then the camp counselors have to discuss why they match with their definition to the term. Other topics for your staff to learn are mental health, because we recognize that when somebody is in a gender or sexual orientation minority, that mental health concerns might come up with this, of the feelings of being excluded in other experiences. And now at camp, they have the opportunity to be safe. So we're looking at debriefing types of activities with our camp staff, both prior to and after the lessons, and providing support to those who require it, because many of our young adults who are camp staff members have different experiences than we do as adult staff. So one thing we've done is we've used some scenarios. We've chosen not to role play them, but just talk out scenarios when somebody is having a mental health crisis or concern that comes up at camp, and how we respond to that appropriately. One other topic that you might want to consider with resources at a staff training session is mental health first aid. Many of us in Ohio have become certified in mental health first aid, either for youth and or adults. Recognizing your camp nurse or medical professional should be aware of these needs, both for mental health and for physical health, including those of somebody who might be transgender. Use your local resources and services and your LGBTQ plus community organizations, because we are not all experts on this, but there are people who are. And last but not least, model the desired inclusive behavior you wish to see. So in order to be inclusive at camp, there are many ways to do so. Taking a look at a few of these. Again, introducing yourself with your own personal pronouns. This can be tough at first until you get used to it. But as you practice it and do so in a safe environment, it will become second nature and not really think about it much. One of the biggest ones is to listen with an open mind. And as 4-H educators, I know that we all try, and that is something that we can do. But by not making assumptions, it is okay to ask open-ended questions. Definitely take action when you recognize that others are engaging in conduct that might be harassing or discriminatory. We know working with young people, they come from different backgrounds, and what might be okay at home and what might be okay in a certain setting is not appropriate in 4-H and not appropriate with our young people. So interrupting inappropriate jokes or shutting down a derogatory remark. Speak up for those who are not present. Even if you don't recognize that somebody might be gay or transgender or bisexual or any of the other represented identities of LGBTQ, speak up for them and recognize, hey, how would somebody feel if they were here and heard you say what you just said about somebody who is gay or somebody who is trans? What does that look like? So speak up for those voices and express confidentiality, especially if you have a young person come out to you or recognize that they need someone to listen to them, that you are there for them, and share with them that it's not your role to out an individual. So a camper came to me and expressed their gender identity or perhaps sexual orientation, and they feel comfortable doing so. I'm perfectly comfortable responding to them and saying, thank you for letting me know and that you trust me with that information, and know that you're safe telling me that, because I won't be sharing it with anybody else here at camp. But if you feel like you want to, you can do that. It is a Title IX offense to out somebody, especially in transgender or other gender nonconforming roles. So please keep that in mind.
And that's one of the things too, which we'll get here soon to scenarios and that kind of stuff. But a common thing is, well, why didn't you let me know that Kayla used to be Kyle and that kind of stuff? And it's because it is a Title IX offense to do so. Not that we want to do that anyway, but that's your legal obligation, I guess, if you will, to provide a reasoning.
Right, and that goes beyond just at camp, right? That goes for any of our 4-H events. That if somebody expresses an identity that they want to use at camp, and then they go back to their local county and they perhaps might not be out there, that is difficult. We can't lie about that. It is difficult when a young person is transitioning and has different identities, but they're choosing to be out at camp because of the safe space that's presented, and recognizing that the next time you see them, they might be using their birth name again. That's hard. But it's a case-by-case situation that we have worked with here in Ohio, and I'm certain that some of our colleagues in other states have as well. So speaking of that, when we're expressing concerns specific to our trans-identifying individuals, such as Hannah said, if somebody fills in that blank and it's something other than male or female, we want to talk to them and ask about their comfort, but also recognizing the comfort of others. If somebody knew that, using myself as an example, if my name previously was Kyle and people recognized me as a man and now I'm showing up to camp as a female, what do others think of me? Are they expecting me to be in the guys' cabin? Is it Hannah's job as camp director to tell them about my transition? Or is it up to me? So we need to recognize the comfort of others. If the individual who is identifying as transitioning wants their cabin mates or perhaps cabin staff to know about their transition, we ask them if they want to share that message. And that has come in a meeting or perhaps come through a letter to their camp staff, because we want the comfort of their colleagues to also know in a camp environment that they are safe. The other concerns that we need to ask are the rooming and overnight accommodation. So again, we definitely have shared housing. We want to make sure, do you feel more comfortable on the male side or female side, given where they're currently at? Using appropriate restroom facilities. Again, this is something that when somebody identifies as transgender or intersex, and we only have male bathrooms or female bathrooms, that they are offered the opportunity to use whichever one fits their gender identity. It is not to be disclusionary to have them be the only ones use a single-sex bathroom or to have to go use the single stall restroom in, say, the staff quarters, because that would be excluding them from the camp population.
And this is, of course, like we're talking, most camps in Ohio at least they have a female side of camp and a male side of camp. If there are some camps, you might have special cabins where everybody has their own living quarters and that kind of stuff. So if you have that, then this obviously is not going to be as concerning for you because everybody's placed differently. They have their own restroom, they have their own lodging, that sort of thing. So this is more for individuals that have one chunk of camp is typically males and one chunk of camp is typically females too. So just making sure that you're aware of where we're coming from on that.
Right. As I mentioned before, communicating the needs with other staff. Who needs to know? If it's a camper, does their cabin counselor need to know that they are transgender? No, it's not our story to share. And how do we know that these are the concerns specific to trans-identifying individuals? Is because we've asked. And each time we encounter a new situation, that is our first step, is to ask the person what they need to be comfortable at camp.
And that can also include like giving options. So like, here's what the camp is. Your options are A, B, C, D, or maybe it's only A or B or whatever that is. But to letting them, it's okay to say, here are your options. It's obviously reasonable accommodations, not, well, we're going to build a brand new building just for you. That's probably not really realistic, but to make sure that they are aware of what those are.
And we're going to go into some scenarios right now. We've got about 15 minutes left, which is our Q&A period. some of these scenarios might be questions that you have in mind. So please jump in and add them to the chat box as Hannah's going through some of these, because we want to address your questions while we are here for you.
So the first scenario that we have here, and we try to come up with some that we thought might be beneficial for discussion for you as we're going through this. So, and they may or have happened. So a parent questions the orientation or gender identity of their child's cabin mate or camp staff. So there's a group of males, and a parent upon arrival notices that one of them does not appear to be a male, you know, and so they come to you, they come to another counselor, they go to somebody else, and they're making a big stink of it, or they're even just questioning it calmly. Type in the chat box. I'm curious what your response to that would be. Or you can unmute yourself too, would be an option if you're really brave. Any ideas?
And I know some of you have probably recognized other hard situations that have come up. Maybe it wasn't about a camp staff member's gender identity or sexual orientation, but about other questions that sometimes parents have questions about camp staff and what's appropriate. So a response shared is that campers typically don't know who their cabin mates are until they do room assignments. Great, so the parents might not recognize it at the beginning of camp. But what happens if the parent asks after camp has happened, Hannah, and a parent calls our office and says, so I hear that my camper's counselor was transgender. How could you do such a thing?
Or they were pretending to be someone they weren't, or yes, those types of things. So things that we have done here, and again, I'm going back to, it's a Title IX offense to out anybody. And so you cannot legally tell anybody that Kayla used to be Kyle or Hannah used to be Harry or whatever it is. That is not okay for lots of reasons, but that's your foundational reason. And so you refer back to, well, that document that you got at the beginning, you know, go back in time and look at that letter that we had highlighted that we shared of what our excerpt was from the leadership camp letter, saying that we have an affirming and inclusive environment and we're non-discriminatory and that sort of thing. And so we make the accommodations to include all participants. And then they say, well, then their response is, well, then my kid's not safe there. They don't feel comfortable there. And our response is, it's not required for your child to attend camp. And so that is your choice of what you choose to do or to not do. And so that's a hard thing to say, especially when I know we all want to, you know, increase our camp numbers and have a lot of people and that kind of stuff. And so we want to make sure that we do include that in there. So next situation, and I see a scenario on there. We will get to those, I promise. We'll address those for you there, Becky, and other people that might have it. So the how-to, a camper arrives at camp and prefers a name that is not on their registration form. So let's say that somebody by the name of Sue arrived to camp and said that they wanted to be known as Joe at camp. Ideas for what you think we could do for that?
I'm wondering if anybody has had this happen. I can share an example that occurred this summer, and a camper arrived at camp, got all of their registration information, got their name tag, and it wasn't until a few hours later when they introduced themselves to one group that they shared a different name that was on their name tag. And thank you, Brenda, for sharing. Make a new name tag and call them what they preferred. Absolutely.
Perfect answer.
Thank you. And that's how we handled this situation as well.
Next one, a parent threatens not to send their child to camp because of a concern that there is an LGBTQ individual, Q plus individual in their cabin or at camp. So a parent threatens, well, I'm not going to send Susie or Joey or whatever the individual's name is because I heard that someone's there. And so again, you can give them the choice to what I said before, give them the choice of, it is an option for you to attend camp. You're not required to attend camp. And so that, we are an affirming and inclusive camp, non-discriminatory and all that kind of stuff. Going back to Becky's question, how about the campers themselves? Do they have a right to request a different room? And so my response to this is the reason why they request a different room? Is it because they're not comfortable? Is it because that's probably what it is. And so, in my opinion, personally, it depends on how they address the situation with me. If it's, and this is I don't want to say a case-by-case situation, but it is a case-by-case situation. So if I have someone that approaches me and said, hey, I understand that Kayla used to be Kyle, and I'm glad that Kayla's going to be at camp. I look forward to working with her at camp. However, I'm having a hard time knowing that she used to be Kyle, and I was really good friends with Kyle when she was a he, and so I'm just not comfortable myself yet to be there. I look forward to working with her at camp, but I just personally am just, not comfortable with it. It is okay to make those cabin request changes, but I would caution that you don't want to get into then you have to, well, I don't like this person because they are tall. I don't want to room with this person because they wear pink pants. I don't want to room with this person because they have brown eyes, like whatever it is. So I would take caution in that with what it is that you're doing for those things.
Right. And the other thing is if somebody is changed from one cabin to another after a camp has started, to not draw attention to why that change took place. Just as Hannah said, it might create a domino effect of others wanting to do cabin switches. The other thing is you may not have additional bunks available to switch somebody out of a cabin. And in that case, it is an opportunity for growth of we learn to work and live together, or perhaps being at camp right now isn't the best place for an individual if that opportunity to accept differences isn't accepted yet. I want to respond to Becky's question. I see a Hawaiian name that looks like, is spelt differently, registered as Kayla, but pronounced differently. Could you just change it? I would respond to that individual and ask if they would like their name spelt that way on their name tag before they show up. Just verify with them. Say, hey, Kayla, I recognize that, usually we end up calling you, I don't want to say it wrong, Kalea, maybe? Can we just change that for you? Would you like that? So ask that of that person's behalf. And then the other, Kalea, yeah? Good. And the other one about changing our example was Sue to Joe. Clearly that sounds very feminine to masculine. I have not had one of that extreme differentiation occur on site. I have had more gender neutral names come up. So for example, some of those that we shared, like Blake Shelton, a Blake could be a guy or a girl. Sean could be a guy or a girl. Chris could be a guy or a girl. So if I had somebody named Mary and they wanted their name changed to Chris at camp, that was done very easily without anybody recognizing that there was really a change. Now, you bring up a good point. Does that look from a Sue to a Joe bring up people to ask more questions? Probably. So you have to ask the camper if that's what they would like.
And the other thing with that too, thinking back to the names and what they're registered as. So we ask for what your name is, and then we ask for what name you want on your name tag. And so a lot of times that's, my name's Elizabeth and I just want to be known as Liz or Beth or whatever. So a lot of times that's probably more of what you're going to get. But sometimes there is that, you know, Kayla is my given name, but I want to go by Kyle or whatever that would be. And then that opens a conversation to do that. And this year, I think our example of that was because mom and dad wanted to know this person as Kayla, and then when they arrived to camp, wanted to be known as, you know, Sam. And so that was the difference for that too. All right, so our next situation, a camp participant begins to spread rumors regarding the sexual orientation or gender identity of a cabin mate or camp staff. Ideas for what we could do with this, or you could think how you might handle it.
So while you're thinking of that, part of this comes with our camp staff training, is that we recognize that even though it might be uncomfortable for our young counselors and adults to have to put a stop to derogatory or discriminatory rumors or anything else, even if they are rooted in what someone believes to be fact, it has to be shut down. And that response comes very strongly from a camp counselor or a camp director or staff member. I recognize here Ashley shares that ask the individual how they would feel if someone did that to them. Explain that bullying is not permitted and we can and will send them home right away if it continues. That's absolutely correct. And we go back to that initial pre-camp letter that we share, that a camp is a safe and self-affirming place for everybody. So even if somebody was gay or transgender or going by a different name, that's who they are here. And we accept them for that and for who they are, and no questions about it. And I like Ashley's answer of the buck stops here. We can and would send you home right away. Bullying is not permitted.
And the other thing too, that we didn't have a how-to, but this kind of leads into that of similar to rumors of, so, you know, Kayla and I are in the same cabin and we have a counselor that, or I'm a co-counselor with Kayla, and we have a camper. Kayla leaves, you know, she was Kyle a year ago. She's Kayla now. Kayla leaves and they ask me like, hey, so what's going on with Kayla? You know, like I'm getting a funny vibe, you know, that she used to be Kyle or you know, this somebody else, like that kind of stuff. And the response is, you need to talk to Kayla about that. Like, so not spreading them yourself. So oh, well, actually a year ago she was Kyle and blah, blah, blah. Like, oh, just helping you out. Because again, Title IX offense to do that. And so by having them, encouraging them to just talk to that person and having a conversation, and Kayla's probably very comfortable perhaps sharing that information with them, like, yeah, I did used to be Kyle, but that is her decision to make that statement, to share with somebody else.
Great. And of course we share these scenarios based on our own responses, because these are experiences that we have had here with Ohio 4-H at some of our state or local events. You might have some of your own, and even if you didn't share those questions now, feel free to send them our way. I encourage additional resources for you to take a look at. If you'd like to download the Genderbread handout, either from our slide here or finding it online, you may do so. The University of California has a great resource. It's titled 4-H Camp Practices for Inclusion of All Individuals of Gender Identities, Gender Expression, Sexual Orientations. And that document was published in 2017, and that's what helped us guide our responses to many of our early situations. So I encourage that one. Additional responses or resources, take a look at your local organizations such as PFLAG. We have something called Kaleidoscope, which is a youth center. GLSEN, which is the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network. And also, as university employees, you have resources on campus that you can reach out to, a multicultural center, your diversity inclusion offices, and even human resources. We have plenty of guest speakers that came to the Ohio 4-H LGBTQ+ Summit who have been our sounding board when we face difficult questions, and it has been really great to have that network for us and our colleagues. So with that, we want to thank you for your time for the last hour and also acknowledge the technological difficulty we had early on. So thanks for your patience. But we will answer any other questions if someone wants to jump into the chat box, or else you have our information here. You can call or email us.
Yes, thank you so much, Kayla and Hannah. Like you said, people, you are welcome to chat some questions in the chat box, or if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question using your microphone, we welcome that too.
This is Becky. I have a quick question. I hope it's a quick question. But how's the best way to go ahead and start all of what you guys are putting out as far as being inclusive of all? It's not an issue for us at all. I mean, we're open to anyone participating in our camps, but trying to make word changes and things like that, how's the most subtle way of doing this without like drawing attention to, oh my goodness, somebody might be, different, or without, making someone feel like, oh gee, who is that person? Is that person somebody I didn't think they were, that kind of thing. And I'm not sure if that came out right or not, but what is the best way to do this so that it's just real subtle and, it's not like we're making a big deal out of it or any of that kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Well, I think that's one of the things that I know we've strived to do with our trainings and that kind of stuff. We've been doing the pronoun thing before we had any individuals identify as transgender come to camp, and so that was just kind of built into our culture already. But I think that what we started to do is just updating the camp letter, the first thing. And my guess is most of you have universities that have a non-discriminatory clause that you have to put on all of your things anyway. And so just to kind of elaborate a little bit more, that's what we needed to do with that information on the pre-camp letter. And then really after that, I think it goes to your staff training. And so to model that yourself, but then when you do your staff training to do the pronouns, to do the genderbread activity, to kind of train them on an inclusive thing, and then they will continue that, then that creates a ripple effect, right? So that it continues going out into the campers as they're doing that. Do you have other thoughts, Kayla, to add?
Well, and as I mentioned, with having the responses when somebody's signing up for camp, that they fill in their name, they fill in their gender on a blank. For those who have never questioned their gender, they don't think anything of it. Instead of circling male or female, they just write it in. But for that young person who now has the opportunity to address their gender the way they want it to be, that is so freeing for them and so important to know that they have somebody safe. And even if they choose not to identify by their gender that they would like to be, they at least are now seeing subtle hints that you as their 4-H educator are safe for them. And you mentioned that you haven't recognized any problems and everyone is very inclusive. That's awesome. I'd much rather have that and keep that moving forward than have a really negative situation, totally deter somebody from 4-H or a camping environment because of something negative that happens, and then you spend the next couple years rebuilding that relationship. So I would say for the few folks, we do know that everything that we addressed here in this session, is focused on a population that is a minority. So it doesn't affect everyone directly, but for those who it is, it makes an incredible difference to see them show up at camp and be proud of who they are and know that they're safe there. I really appreciate that you asked that question, and I hope that other states can continue seeing that there are not issues or concerns because it has been done subtly, right? We added the non-discrimination statement in the letter. Nobody questioned why it was there, it just is. Nobody questioned why the gender is now a space instead of circling male or female, it just is. So we didn't draw attention to it, we just slowly made those changes. Nobody questioned the dress code change. it just removed male or female, and it's been fine.
Other questions or clarifications that we can answer for you or point you in another direction?
All right. If not, you can definitely see our email addresses and phone numbers there. We know it is a busy summer camping season, and Hannah and I also are not always in the office to respond to those immediately. But if you do find yourself in a situation concerning the inclusivity of your young people or your staff members and how to handle it, we'd definitely be happy to assist you.
Thank you so much, Kayla and Hannah, for joining us today. We appreciate it so much.
Yep. Thanks for taking time out of your schedules to listen in.
All right, so everyone, this will be archived. If you want to view it again, it'll be posted on the NA4HA website. And as Kayla and Hannah said, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to them. This is great recommendations today, you two. As a state events manager, I'm already thinking about our forums and what some things that they say that could be said differently. So I appreciate you sharing this today, and I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you. Happy camping, everyone.